nehme mir die Freiheit heraus, Sie in deutscher Sprache begrüßen zu dürfen. Die restliche Veranstaltung wird in englischer Sprache sein, weil wir heute internationale Gäste wieder begrüßen dürfen. Es freut mich sehr, dass wir bereits im 3. Jahr gemeinsam mit dem Deutsch-Russischen Forum Dr. Ernst Jörg von Studnitz hochkarätige Gäste hier begrüßen dürfen. Am heutigen Abend dürfen wir Herrn Dmitri Trenin, Direktor des Carnegie Zentrums in Moskau, begrüßen. Ansonsten haben wir noch bei den Gästen sehr hochkarätige Personen, die ich jetzt gesondert begrüßen darf. Sollte ich jemand nicht gesagt haben, weil ich ihn wahrscheinlich noch nicht gesehen habe. Dr. Horsma, Vorstand der Gesellschaft für Außenpolitik und Prorektor der Hochschule für Außenpolitik. Dr. Panzer, Ministerialrat und das ungarische Konsulat ist auch hier mit mehreren Personen vertreten, unter anderem Herrn Engel. Gut, schön, dass Sie da sind. Ich wünsche einen wunderschönen Abend und darf direkt das Wort an Dr. von Studnitz weitergeben. Danke.
I can speak German, but since we decided that this should be an evening in English, I will address you in English right away. That makes it possible for our guests of honor and some of the guests present here to follow the talk and the presentation and discussion tonight. First of all, let me very cordially welcome all of you, and in particular Frau Barot, our co-organizer here with her organization, the Treuhand and Steuerberatungsgesellschaft, BBC. Mrs. Barot is a very strong pillar of our activities, that is the German-Russian Forum's activities here in Munich. The German-Russian Forum, let me briefly as introduction give you those who are not regularly present with our not so often meetings here in Munich, explain what it is doing and what it is all about. Beginning of a new start in Russia in the early 90s, there should be an institution that would facilitate meetings between Germans and Russians and should open avenues which until then had not been possible for the reason of the closeness of the Soviet system in Russia. The initial initiative actually was to open ways for German business to go into Russia, because those people who united in the German-Russian Forum 20 years ago, they were people who were already familiar with Russia, who had been actively working there as businessmen, as diplomats, as journalists, and we wanted to share our experience with those who should follow us and should go to Russia. Now, this task, in a different way, but nevertheless still exists to this very day. Today, we have some 6,500 German business companies working in Russia, which is by far the largest number of any country present in Russia. But on the other hand, we feel that it could still be more, and that more should be encouraged to go to Russia and try the possibilities, the great and huge possibilities that exist there, truly under not always easy conditions to work there, because the legal system is a different one. The business activities are characterized by peculiarities which are particularly strongly present in Russia and which appear to be a hindrance to easy development of business relations. But in spite of all of this, we, active in the German-Russian Forum, are convinced that dealing with Russia, working with Russia, establishing these connections is a task which will be with us for a long time to come. I don't know, 20 years, 30 years. We need this intense relationship with Russia in spite of the fact that the media picture in Germany is not very positive about Russia, particularly in these days. You all following the media are aware of this, but this is an additional impulse for us in the German-Russian Forum to work against it and to try to facilitate meetings, to try to create a picture of understanding on the basis of which activities, business activities, activities of people to meet are enhanced and made easier. And this is one of the reasons why we are here tonight. We're here tonight because, in spite of the fact that Berlin is the capital and most of our activities are centered in Berlin, we want to ray out into the country and show what we do and why we do it to you who are here present tonight in Munich and at times also in other places. But let me say a word of praise to Frau Barot and her company. It is through you and only through you that we are able to do that with a certain regularity here in Munich. Were it not for you, we didn't have such a solid base of activity. Thank you very much for this, Frau Bauer. And thank you, all those who came here to be our guests that evening, because we want you to join in this task. And our guest of honor and speaker of the evening, Dmitri Trenin, I'm not going into his curriculum vitae because you have it all printed out in the invitation, so I need not repeat that. But let me assure you, Dmitri Trenin is not only a very dear friend of mine for many years, but he is one of the most distinguished experts on foreign policy analysis in Russia through the institute and with the institute in which he is working, the Carnegie Foundation, which of course is an American institution, but has a branch in Moscow. And his colleagues in the institute, and it's by far not only he, but it's quite a number of very distinguished scholars who are working there, do tremendous work, which in a way echoes what we are doing by giving an analytical picture of Russia through Russian eyes. And I think this is very important. We have to understand Russia through Russian eyes and through the interpretation and explanation that Russians can give to it. And this is what is very important for the forum. We do not want to talk about Russia, but we want to invite Russians to give their picture, and that we can see what is different and what is peculiar in their way of seeing their situation and seeing their way into, I say it with full conviction, into a common future in Europe. But this common future is not at hand right now. But if we are not working for it now, it will not be. And this is the task with which the German-Russian Forum is endowed, and for which an institution like Carnegie Foundation Moscow is working, and is working through Dmitri Trenin, our guest speaker. Now the microphone is off. No, it's not on again. Is working, is coming to us here to share with you. Let's give a heartfelt applause to Dmitri Trenin, so that he will give us a picture of German-Russian relations with the question, as you see it in the invitation, do we need a new Ostpolitik? We had a remarkable start in Ostpolitik in the late 60s, and much that came about in the European development starting from the late 60s, early 70s, until German reunification and the changes in Eastern Europe was not exclusively, but to a great degree also a result of what had been done by far-looking politicians in Germany, not only in Germany, but also in Germany. And we will hear something how this has to continue by the presentation which Dmitri Trenin will give us tonight. Dmitri, the floor is yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank Frau Barrett for the introduction. It's great to be here. My wife, Vera, and I greatly appreciate this. I very much thank Ambassador von Studnitz for his introduction, and moreover, and above all, for his work through the many years we've known each other. Through his work as a very hard-hitting, but very upright and very straightforward German ambassador to Russia. He was, Russian diplomats say, one of the best defenders of the national interest in the Moscow diplomatic corps. And I salute him for his work now with the GermanRussian Forum, which I think is doing exactly what needs to be done at this point to engage in constant and deep dialogue so that Germany and Russia do not miss each other as they negotiate very difficult waters of domestic politics and international relations. I need to apologize maybe for the slightly provocative title of this presentation. Clearly, I was not thinking in terms of telling you what I think you should be doing in Germany. Rather, I was going to come up with a few thoughts about Russia, about where Russia stands, where Russia moves, whether it moves forward, whether it moves backward, and maybe present you with some potential building blocks, or something which might be building blocks for what I think is clearly needed in Europe and in Germany, a new Eastern policy, a new policy in particular with regard to Russia. I'm very concerned because, like so many others, I see Russian-European relations and Russian-German relations stagnating, hit by some kind of a malaise, beset with lots of questions, very few answers. I think there was a good illustration of where we are in today's issue of the Süddeutsche Zeitung. And they had different angles of the Russia issue from Berlin and from Warsaw and Paris and London. And I think that it's very clear that at this point there are more questions than there are answers. Now, it's my job and the job of my colleagues in Moscow, when we go out and meet the international audience, to try to explain Russia. When we work in Russia, we try to change Russia. So it's the two missions, which should not be mixed, which should not be confused. You cannot change Russia, or any country for that matter, for working abroad. But your mission is, when you face international audiences, to try to give them what you think may be a better understanding of the country where you live and the country that you study. I think that it's fair to say that not only the assumptions that Europe / Germany and Russia had of each other back in the 1990s have fallen wide off the mark. That's more or less behind us. But I think we're still living through the disappointments of more recent time. The disappointments, which I think, in part, were due to a misunderstanding. The disappointments related to the Medvedev presidency. Frankly, to me, the Medvedev presidency was Putin's third. And I'm not saying that, in a derogatory fashion. Putin remained the paramount leader. And Putin did not simply use Medvedev as a placeholder, as someone who would warm the seats for 4 years. No, Medvedev had a mission that had been designed and had been given to him by Mr. Putin. I think domestically his mission was to try to try to bring together and bring to the Kremlin those people, those quarters in Russia who, for whatever reason, did not find Mr. Putin terribly attractive. So he was to reach out to the more liberal audiences in Russia. He was to reach out to the internet people, to the communities which were not politically opposed to the Kremlin, but which were in a different in a different dimension, let's say, than the bulk of Putin's supporters. There were people in the Kremlin who thought that basically there were two Russias. One was the Russia of today, let's say, the Russia of people who support the current regime, the people who depend on that regime, be that pensioners, be that government employees. And then there are other people, more independent, financially, socially, intellectually, people who are not dependent on the regime, and people who want more than what they are given. So Putin's mission was to, and for Russia to be able to exist, you have to, the Kremlin thought, you have to be able to manage both. Russia 1 is your stability. That's where you are, okay? But in order to move anywhere, you need Russia 2. So Mr. Putin would be securing Russia 1, and Mr. Medvedev would be helping Russia walk along into the future without losing this stability, and very importantly, without losing this regime. So that was more or less the idea. I think what was also misunderstood on the international level is that Medvedev's mission abroad was, I would say, that of a scout who was sent by Mr. Putin to the Western world to learn what was possible to do with you guys. What kind of cooperation was possible? He clearly understood that a lot of people hated him because they hated him, and hated what he said, disagreed with what he said, because of who was saying these things, right? So he decided to give the Western world a different person, with a nicer face, younger, without this pedigree of KGB past, someone who was given a mandate, a pretty broad mandate, to engage precisely with the people in the Western, in Europe and the United States, and try to see what was possible. The most important thing, of course, for Medvedev in that period was political military affairs, missile defense. And Medvedev came up in Lisbon with a proposal of essentially merging missile defense systems of the United States / NATO and of the Russian Federation. Basically, he was, as Dmitri Rogozin, at that time the ambassador to NATO, as Rogozin said, we'll have a common defense perimeter. Well, for many people, for most people, for almost everyone on this part of the former divide, that was too much, and certainly for the United States. And that plan did not take off. That was too much. Someone told me that when Rogozin was visiting the United States, he was given a chance to look at the potential future cell for missile defense cooperation between the United States and Russia, and it was the size of a quarter of this room, more or less. So that was the scale of thinking on the U.S. side with regard to ballistic missile defense cooperation. They were very cautious, to say the very least. Modernization alliances, that was the crux of Medvedev's outreach to Europe. I think that went well at the level of signed papers. And of course, within this, you can see that this was somehow subsuming within it the practical activities that Ambassador von Studnitz referred to, the 6,500 German enterprises active in Russia, but they were active even before that. It did produce some result, but not much. On the level of the world order, the signature event of the Medvedev presidency was the Libya resolution, which I think it was wrong to claim that it was Medvedev doing something against Mr. Putin. That was absolutely impossible, and the Russian National Security Council was actually debating two potential versions of Russian activity or Russian action with regard to the UN Security Council resolution on Libya, to abstain or to approve. There was no option for vetoing the resolution. Now they decided to be cautious, and they decided to abstain, but that allowed the operation to save the lives of Libyan people in Benghazi to go ahead. Now, at the end of the day, the Russians basically said, and Mr. Putin basically said, you cheated us. So, and let me also say that it was never reported in the Russian media, but I think that when Medvedev was visiting here in the summer of 2011, and he was called by the Chancellor a candidate to the Russian presidency, that did not sound well to Mr. Putin, because he thought it was his prerogative to decide who is the candidate, who is, at least that was the feeling at the time. So there were a number of reasons why Putin decided to go back to the Kremlin, but even if all the things that I have mentioned happened differently, Medvedev's presidency was still Putin's. What we have now is very much the result of Putin's reaction to the developments in foreign relations, but even more importantly, developments within Russia. And Medvedev's outreach basically failed, as we could see back in December 2011, as thousands of people marched into the streets and basically demanded a new election, or basically condemned the flawed election in Moscow. And this led the government to modify the existing regime, to do several things, to modify the regime in terms of giving more concessions, at the same time to employ targeted repression against those who went beyond what the Kremlin designated as the red lines, and to discipline one's own folks, to discipline the Russian elite. So that was basically the reaction of the Kremlin. But it went beyond that. He has been evolving in that direction for a period of time, and certainly he has learned a lot on the job. And I respect someone who clearly identifies her values and principles, but that leaves that raises a very important issue. If Russia cannot be all conservative, and that's conservatives cannot be imposed on everyone. We also know that Russia cannot be all communist or all socialist. We've seen that, we've been there, and that's no longer the future. And we also saw that Russia can no longer be only liberal. We thought in the 1990s that somehow out of this the remnants of Red Russia, a liberal Russia would stand up. Now that's not happened. That was never going to happen. But the idea is that what you have in Russia is a better distinction within society, within the political elite, among the people who take different positions. Russian society, as a result of what started in 2011, is actually moving pretty actively in all directions at the same time. You have libertarians, but you have your fundamentalists. You have people, let's say, on the traditionalist side. You have people on the socialist side, and this is I think a new development in Russia. The Russians have stopped talking only to their government. The Russians have started talking among themselves, and they found out that there are so many things that separate them. But then they also feel that there's something that unites them. So the big issue today in Russia is well, doing something about the situation in which you have a country but not a nation. You have so many people in Russia, 140 plus million people, but they do not add up to a nation. But you cannot build a nation unless you decide, unless you agree, what is it that binds you together? What is the common ground? And as people discuss, as people fight among themselves, the big issue is what actually unites them. This is a hugely important issue, given the ethnic situation in Russia, given the immigration policies, the lack of sound immigration policies in Russia. What you've just seen on your TV screens in southern Moscow is only one, it's perhaps the biggest, but it's only one of a series of cases in which you have riots, mostly in big towns, but sometimes in small towns in Russia. Because of the lack of serious immigration policies. This is something that needs to unite people. It's not about ideology, or it's not precisely about ideology. It's about doing something very specific. It's also a situation in Russia in which you're challenged, the country is challenged on a number of fronts at the same time. Mr. Putin's first two terms were extremely positively viewed by the bulk of the Russian people because they brought in so much prosperity. Russian people have never lived as well as they did as they do now, and they never enjoyed as much stability as they enjoy now. They never enjoyed as much freedom combined with affluence or something that approaches that as they do now. Well, of course, there were periods of greater freedom, but there were periods of high instability and high danger. The 1990s, or you can say 1917, was a very free period of, a period of extreme freedom in Russia. It didn't last very long. You also have a very difficult economic situation in the country, and that perhaps drives Mr. Putin to take very drastic decisions within his government. It's a situation in which this growth is flagging. We can no longer talk about growth, and as Russian economic experts are saying, it's better to have a crisis than what we have now. We have stagnation. A crisis normally offers a way out of itself, right? And the crisis sort of pushes you to the right decisions. Very painful, very hard, but you know what you need to do. Stagnation, you can spend a decade in stagnation. Look at some countries around the world. So Russia could be in a pretty bad situation because of that. but this economic situation has implications for social peace. The social situation has implications for the political stability in the country. And I think we all realize how brittle the stability that exists today actually is. Let me say at this point, don't get me wrong, I do not predict gloom and doom for Russia. I would say that the pessimists are leaving, the optimists are staying. Since my center is in Moscow, I'm technically an optimist on Russia. And frankly, I believe that it is these issues that should consolidate people across the very, very many divides that exist in Russia and help them find solutions. Let me say a couple of words about Russia's foreign policy in Mr. Putin's fourth term. Mr. Putin has had four foreign policies. He started out as a would-be ally of the United States. He made his Berlin speech in German at the Bundestag in 2001, pledging Russia's European choice. He then had to recoil, and he then pursued a policy of Russia's reassertion. And the Munich speech in this very building, 2007, was the defining speech. Very big difference between the Berlin speech of 2001 and the Munich speech of 2007. And this led to the Georgian War of 2008. Now, Mr. Putin's third presidency, as I already called it, was Medvedev's term. And it was the reset, and it was modernization alliances. Now, Putin is in his fourth term and his fourth foreign policy, and that's, to me, that's sovereignization. Basically, it aims at zero outside influence in Russian domestic politics. It clearly aims at positioning Russia as an independent power unit looking in all directions. He prioritizes Eurasia. He upgrades China and Asia in his foreign policy. He's more combative toward the United States, but he is being combative with a goal of not with the goal of annihilating the United States. Clearly impossible, clearly not what Putin is. He doesn't want to destroy, he cannot destroy, he doesn't want to destroy the United States. But he wants the United States to treat Russia as a co-equal partner. So that's the crux of his policy. I would say that that's precisely his aim toward Europe. When he talks about the Eurasian Union, for us to put it in the right perspective, it amounts today to about 8% of Russia's foreign trade. 8% is an important number, but it's 8%. Russia's trade with the Eurasian Union is, in other words, 7 times smaller than Russia's trade with the European Union. The idea of the Eurasian Union, and Putin was very clear in formulating it, is to have a more co-equal relationship with the EU. In other words, the early ideas of Russia being an extension of Europe, the way Ukraine today is seen as an extension of Europe, is passé. Putin's idea, whether he manages to, and how he manages, and to what extent he manages to implement it, is to have a more co-equal relationship. So that's basically it. Let me say finally that as an outsider, coming here and sometimes peeking in by reading what your newspapers say, what your politicians or experts say, I'm sometimes bewildered that there's such a gulf between, if I were to caricaturize it, the two positions. One position talks about German business interests as the sole interest of Germany in Russia. Basically, it's the economy stupid and full stop. And the other position would focus on this or that issue of the day, be that the Pussy Riot thing, be that the anti-gay propaganda legislation, be that whatever is in the news today, and focus exclusively on that. There's very little in between. And there's very little between the two poles, I would say. That, I think, is not very healthy. And that is why I still believe, it's clearly for you to decide, but I still believe that coherent, a whole approach, holistic approach toward Russia is very much in Germany's interest. And I frankly believe that it's missing. People often talk about the lack of strategy. I think there's a lack of strategy often. The lack of strategy is often explained by not having a goal. And I think that the goal that the people in the West, broadly, set with regard to Russia in the 1990s, well, it was partially achieved by the Russians, partially achieved through Western support, which was Western activity, which was very substantial in the 1990s, but it's history these days. Russia is in the hands of those, basically those who live there, those who care about it and live in Russia. And I think that this new reality is not very well understood in the sense of developing a new goal of relations with Russia. Because it cannot be a new goal to simply to get tough with Russia. I often hear the same thing when I watch the debate in the Russian Duma. They tell the government, you've got to get tough. And emotionally you understand that. But what does it mean in political terms? What does it mean at the end of the day? You can get tough, you can get less tough. Will you be more effective or not? And then effective with regard to what? What is the goal? What is the achievable goal that you set yourself? So I would say this. Again, I'm not trying to be lecturing. It's not a lecture, right? It's just a few remarks. I think Russia deserves a lot more attention than it receives, and it deserves a bit deeper attention than it gets, beyond the headlines, in other words. I would not think it's a great idea to think what's best for Russia and the Russians. I think that they are perfectly capable to come up with, well, perfectly capable or not, but they are on their own. They're adults. They've been around. They spent 20 years traveling around the world, listening, speaking, interacting with people. So I think they should be on their own as far as the country is concerned, the future of the country is concerned. They will decide themselves what their values should be. My ideal picture of a future Russia, of a future Russian nation, you have the Russian flag, which is now more or less the way it is depicted here, with gaps between the three colors. The white representing traditionalists, conservatives, the blue representing the liberals, and the red representing the socialists, communists, whatever. They still exist apart from one another. There is no glue, there's no thread that binds them together. This is, as I called it, the lack of the absence of a Russian nation at this point. But that's the way. And as they discuss and fight it among themselves, in figurative sense, I hope, they will come up with something. And I believe that the outside world needs to understand what's going on, but not try to second guess and not try to help somebody do better. You face the entire Russian people. Your Russian partners are of different colors. You cannot only focus on one color. They should come in, as we, when we come to Germany or when we come to the United States, we have people from, separated in their domestic politics by pretty serious divides, or cultural divides, or religious denominations. And yet, you're all Germans, they're all Americans, and that's fine for us. I think that would apply to Russia at some point. I think it would make sense, though, to think about how much the West's, and particularly Germany's, indirect role can be in helping Russians do what you think is the right thing. Reinvigorated, re-energized Europe will have a tremendous demonstration impact, whereas a weak and self-doubting but loudly preaching one will only provoke sneers. I think I would stop here because I always value the give and take, the discussion period as a period where I learn. And let me conclude by saying that I strongly believe, as someone who's been dealing with, studying Russian-Western relations for some time, that leadership is absolutely indispensable in international affairs. Ostpolitik was about leadership. It was about leadership within the country. It was leadership by one person or by several persons belonging to one political camp, but it then spread to include the entire political class. It was also leadership displayed by Germany, in those days West Germany, on the diplomatic stage, vis-a-vis Germany's great partner, the United States of America. That was a case when German policies basically were leading the policies of the West, and they were leading in the right direction. And I would hope, as I watch Europe and Germany today, dealing with what people refer to as a crisis, I think that as Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, says, never waste a good crisis. I'm sure it will not be wasted in Europe. I'm sure it will give Europe a new boost. I'm sure it will give Europe a sense of purpose, new sense of purpose, a new sense of leadership, a foreign policy worth the name. And I hope that among the priorities within the foreign policy setting, the new Ostpolitik for Germany and for Europe will be somewhere close to the top. Thank you so much.